Hi, I'm Mark Cunningham with Grace Property Management here in Denver, Colorado. Last month we did a video for real estate investors on the topic of a recent bill that passed the Colorado legislature, HB 24-1098, which really drastically changed the rules of renting out any property in Colorado. We had a lot of questions come in from our clients, from other landlords, from tenants, specifically around the idea of the lease renewal process. Am I, as a landlord, am I required to offer lease renewal to my tenants? What are the terms that I can decide? No, I just want to non-renew that. And there's a lot of confusion. So we want to go through just a couple aspects of this bill to make sure that landlords understand that per the new law in Colorado, you as a landlord, in essence, you are required by law to offer a lease renewal to your tenants unless one of 6 things is true. You have to have what's called cause now to non-renew a tenant. So a landlord may not terminate or non-renew, and we mean the same thing there. Terminate at the end of the lease, which is commonly referred to as non-renew the lease without cause. And this bill redefines what that means. So the idea of a lease non-renewal no longer exists because you're required by law to renew the lease unless there's cause, in which case it is now referred to as a no-fault eviction. And if you're kind of scratching your head, don't worry, so are we. It's a little bit confusing, but what it's going to do is it's going to require you as the landlord, instead of saying, hey, Mr. Tenant, I'm not sure what I want to do with this property. Your lease is expiring, and I may want to sell it. I may want to fix it up. I may want to move back into it. I just don't know, so I'm not going to renew your lease. Just wanted to let you know. The lease expires. The contract is over. I want my property back. Well, what I just said is no longer allowed under Colorado state law. You have to have cause. You have to have one of 6 reasons, and there's only 6, which you as the landlord cannot extend a lease renewal to your tenant. So I'm going to walk through those 6 reasons for cause here very, very quickly. Now, we're not attorneys. This is not legal advice. We've researched these bills and had a lot of conversations with our attorneys. Reach out to us with questions that way. So what are the 6 reasons that you as a property manager or you as a landlord may choose not to offer and extend a lease renewal to your tenant? Number 1, demolition, meaning I'm going to tear this thing down to the ground. I'm just going to demolish the property. Now, underneath this section, it also says that if you're going to convert the property to a non-residential use. So if it's a single-family home and you're going to convert it to a VRBO, that would be a reason to non-renew. If you're going to convert it to an office building, which in our 48 years we've never seen done, but if you're going to do that, that is a valid reason to non-renew your tenant. Probably isn't going to come up a whole lot, but that's number 1. That's reason number 1 that you can choose to not renew your tenant. Number 2, if you're going to make substantial repairs or renovations. Now, this is not as straightforward as it seems, because every one of these reasons or opportunities to not renew a lease has a lot of different nuances. So, for example, the repairs or the renovations must qualify under the terms of the law. So some of those things have to be specifically that the repair can't be accomplished with the tenant in place. Like, it is practically impossible to make the repair, the renovation with the tenant in place. If they can stay in place, then this doesn't qualify. It cannot because of a breach of the warranty of habitability, which is a little bit confusing because most things that are going to require substantial repairs or renovations are going to technically fall under a warranty of habitability concept. So if the tenant has claimed a breach of habitability, you can't say, well, gosh, you're right. There is no hot water, there is no roof, and I've got to replace it, and I can't do that with you here, so you got to move out. No, that would be a warranty of habitability issue, and in a future video we'll be talking about the recent updates to the warranty of habitability law, so stay tuned for that. That's very confusing as well. And it must also require the tenant to vacate for at least 30 days. So if you can get the work done in 3 weeks, then this doesn't qualify to have them non-renew because you're going to be making substantial repairs and renovations. It gets a little more complicated underneath this particular area because the notice to vacate that you give them because of this, you're going to say, hey, I am legit making substantial repairs. I'm going to add another room on this property. I'm going to gut the kitchen and gut the bathrooms, and it's going to take me 3 months. And so I really legit need you to move out because I'm going to do a major gut. That's fine, but the notice to vacate you give them, it must give a work description. You have to say what you're going to do, and you have to give them an expected completion date for the work. And you say, well, Mark, why? Like, what difference does it make? Why do I need to tell the tenant how long it's going to take me? Because you also have to give the tenant who is moving a first right of refusal to re-rent the property once the renovation work is done. Now, there's a lot of nuance within that, the timing, we're not going to get into that, but just know that that is the case. Number 3, If you're going to be moving back into the property, that is a reason, that is a legal cause to do a no-fault eviction or a lease non-renewal. Hey, I'm moving back into my property, and it's if you as the landlord, that's what it's classified as, or a family member. Now, the legal definition of family member in Colorado is pretty expansive. It's not defined in the bill itself, but it refers to another bill which defines family member, and it is pretty expansive. It goes so far as to say relatives. It doesn't have to be a blood relative. It can be someone who you have a close contact and close association with. So it's a pretty broad description, but if they're going to be moving in, they must move in within 3 months. That's what the law states. They have to move in within a 3-month period. Unless they're disabled, then I think they get some extra time as well there that way. And if you change your mind, so if you say, hey, Mr. Tenant, I'm moving in. I'm getting a job transfer back to the area. I'm not going to renew your lease because I'm moving back in, and you give this information, and then they do move, and then your job transfer falls through and you don't move back to the area, you cannot relist this property for rent back on the rental market. In other words, you can't change your mind for at least 90 days. You've got to pull it off the rental market for 90 days. Once the 90 days has lapsed, then you could potentially re-rent the property or advertise it for rent, but you can't even relist it for rent until 90 days has passed if you've informed the tenant of this. That's item number 3. Reason number 4 is if you're going to sell the property. If you just decide, hey, I'm going to sell it, I want out, I'm going to sell this property, that's fine. You can non-renew your tenant at the expiration of their lease. But keep in mind, same thing as I just said before, if you're going to move into the property. If you change your mind on this, so if you list it for sale, or if you're going to list it for sale and you start doing comps and you look at it and you say, no, the market's not as strong as I thought, let's just re-rent it. You can re-rent it, but not for 90 days. You've got to pull it off the rental market for 90 days unless you can prove that you've put it on the multiple list service for a period of time. If it's been on the MLS, then you don't need to wait the full 90 days. So if you're thinking this is very granular and there's a lot in there, it certainly is. It's a pretty confusing bill. We're just trying to kind of lay out some of the groundwork here this way. Number 5, what's the reason number 5 that you can non-renew? And that is if the tenant refuses to sign the renewal that you've offered to them. So remember, you are required by law to offer them a renewal unless one of these causes that we're talking about here is true. So you offer them the renewal, but they just refuse to sign the renewal. They say, no, I'm not going to assign your renewal. Now, once again, there are some specific requirements. The renewal that you offer to them must be reasonable. Now, what is reasonable? Whatever the judge says at the end of the day. But what reasonable kind of means is you can't go in and double the rent. You can't say, hey, you were paying $2,000 a month, I'll renew it, but it's going to be at $4,000 a month when the market rate is really only $2,500. You can't do that. That would not be considered reasonable. So the terms have to be reasonable. Number 2, the landlord must give the tenant a reasonable amount of time to sign that renewal or that extension. So the landlord can't say, here's the renewal extension, you've got 2 hours to sign this, otherwise you have not renewed it and I'm going to get you out. You've got to give them a reasonable amount of time, which most attorneys and we're recommending to be anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks minimum. And then if the tenant doesn't sign, so you offer the renewal under reasonable terms, you wait the 3 weeks, they decline to sign your renewal. In that case, then you have to give them a 90-day notice of non-renewal. And in every one of these cases, by the way, that 90-day notice period is true. So if you're going to sell it, if you're going to move back in, you're still required by law to give a 90-day notice to the tenant of your intent to do that. And every one of these notices have to specifically state which one of these things it is. You can't just say, hey, I'm non-renewing you, and then you think I'm going to do this. You've got to say, I'm non-renewing you because I'm going to sell. And here's the details. I'm non-renewing you because I'm going to do major renovations. Here's the details. So make sure you're using a legally prepared, attorney-prepared letter of non-renewal, even if it is one of these cases here. And then last, what is the last reason, the cause that you could have to non-renew a tenant? And that is if they've been late 3 or more times. You say, oh, well, that's okay. My tenant's late 5 times. I can get them out for this. This bill, 1098, it redefines what a late payment is. So just because your lease agreement defined late as paying after, let's say, the 3rd day of the month, that's not late per 1098. We call it 1098 late because 1098 is the name of the bill. So a 1098 late payment is defined as such. The demand notice must have actually been served. So rent was due on the 1st. They had a grace period till the 3rd, let's call it. They didn't pay. You prepared the 10-day demand notice, which is required in Colorado. You prepared that, did the 2 attempts at service. Now that's been served, so you met that requirement. They also, payment must have been received after the demand period expired. So I served them the 10-day notice, and they paid on day 9. then they're not late per the terms of the new law. They have to be late per these clauses, and then all lates must have been during the current lease period. If they've been with you for 4 years and some of the lates were a long time ago, it doesn't count. It gets pretty nuanced there. You say, well, Mark, okay, those are the 6 reasons I can choose to non-renew. What about lease violations? My tenant's been there, and every 3 weeks I get a call from the neighbor because they're playing their music loud. I walk the property, they haven't mowed the lawn in 3 months. There's holes in the wall. They are really rough on the property. Obviously, I can non-renew them for those reasons. Those are significant lease violations, right? I'm afraid not. You're still required by law to offer a renewal, even if they're violating major terms of the lease. Now, what you can do is you can evict the tenant for a lease violation. So you can evict them for knocking holes in the wall and for disturbing their neighbors and not mowing the lawn and letting it go crazy. You can evict for that, but you can't non-renew for that. Now, that may seem like apples to oranges or nuanced, but it's very, very important, because oftentimes what a landlord will do is say, well, gosh, they are knocking holes in the wall. They are disrupting the neighbors. So when the lease comes up in 2 months, I'm just not going to renew it. You can't do that anymore. Now you're going to be required to offer the renewal, but you could say, hey, you're knocking holes in the walls, you haven't mowed the lawn, you're bothering the tenants. I'm going to actually evict you for lease violations. And you have to go through an eviction process, serve different notices, different timelines, eviction legal process. Very time consuming, very expensive. But that's the only option you have as a landlord to remove your tenant for what are significant lease violations in the lease. Now, 2 other pieces real quickly. Personal service of these demand notices must be attempted twice before the notice can be posted. So you've got to knock on the door twice over 2 different days, attempt to physically serve in person. Don't just post it on the first time or you're in violation. And then secondly, and I said this a moment ago, all these things have to be giving a 90-day notice period. So even in legitimate cases you're going to sell it, you got to give them a 90-day notice regardless of when the lease expires. The 90-day notice must take place after the expiration of the lease agreement. If you want to read 1098, we will link to it on the site. If you didn't watch our video last month where we gave a bigger picture overview and discussed some of the other nuances of this bill, I would encourage you to do so. Next month, we're going to be talking about the Senate bill, which redefines habitability. As one attorney put it to us, Mark, this updated bill on habitability, this makes 1098 look easy. So if you think this is a little bit confusing, this next bill on habitability is even more important to be tracking. If you're a current client of Grace Property Management, just know that we have all this handled for you. We will be helping you with that. Should you want to non-renew your tenant, we will take care of that for you. If you're not a client and you need assistance in renting or managing your property, consider us a resource. Jump on our website, rentgrace.com. Happy to help if we can.